The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies and Miniature War Games with Battle Games magazine, and also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Thanks to everybody for their continued support.
The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 142, Sword and Spear, with Neil Shuck, Mike Hobbs and Mike Whitaker, and guest Mark Lewis. This show was recorded on the 25th of February 2015.
Welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. I'm Neil Shuck, and on today's show I'm joined by Mike Hobbs and Mike Whitaker. Hi chaps.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to have you both on. Today we're going to be re-recording the show that never was.
Yay!
Indeed. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to be joined by Dave Luff, as work commitments meant that he wasn't available to join us in recording, which is a bit of a shame. We had a fantastic laugh with Dave on the show when we last did this. But today we're going to be chatting with Mark Lewis all about Sword and Spear, which I'm sure that will please several of you, since loads of people have been putting comments on the Facebook page and emailing me going, "What are you going to talk about Sword and Spear?" So this is the show, guys. This is the show. It's finally here.
Again.
Yes. Yeah. It's all.
No, it never happened the first time. It's all an illusion.
Yeah. It's a bit like Men in Black, isn't it? You know, watch it again for the first time. So yes, here we are. We have the Sword and Spear show for you finally. Before we do that, we're just going to I just wanted to catch up with these two guys, because it's the first time I've had a chance to have a chat with both of you since a certain Kickstarter finished, where Mike dragged me kicking and screaming into, and then I discovered that was Mike Hobbs dragged me into, and then I discovered Mike Whitaker had been backing it for a while, which is Conan. Yes. The most successful tabletop Kickstarter ever, I think is the phrase. It even beat Bones 2 in the end. $3.2 million. I can't remember how many backers, but there were a lot.
It's definitely more than 10.
Was it about 14,000 or something?
It was completely insane.
No. It's about 17,000 backers, wasn't it?
Something ridiculous like that, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they did pretty much everything right, didn't they? You know, they've been hyping it up for the last 6 months.
Yeah, because didn't they actually kind of start it and stop it again originally?
Yeah, they wanted to do it about 3 or 4 months ago, but then they weren't ready, so they pushed it back. But they've sunk, even before the Kickstarter, they've sunk about €250,000 into the development.
Yeah, I mean, you could see from things like, the quality of some of the miniature sculpting and stuff. I mean, if the miniatures in the final game are going to be anything like that,
they are just utterly gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few odd ones in there, but I mean, there's a lot of miniatures. But the miniatures are fantastic,
amazing.
I don't know about you guys, but I was more interested in the miniatures originally. I thought I'd be able to use them for all sorts of games. But once I saw the gameplay videos, the rules themselves are fantastic. I just like the idea of the rules. This whole cooperative way of playing, where, it's not a case of, it's my turn, so I'm going to do this, and now it's your turn, you're going to do that. It's the whole talking and working out the order of how you do stuff.
Besides, that means it's a board game, and you know what that means.
It doesn't
count. Yeah.
It doesn't count towards the pledge, absolutely.
Although, as far as I'm concerned, the pledge finishes at the end of January. Really?
No. If you're going to make a pledge, you pledge it for the year, mate. I mean,
no, a year's a long time. I mean, a month is pretty bad. And let's be honest, I think I lasted about a week.
Technically, because Conan is a board game, and something else we're about to discuss is also technically a board game, I have not bought any figures for new armies, new periods, or new scales yet this year, and it's nearly the end of February.
Yeah, I have to put my hand up and say, ditto. I have resisted. I have resisted a couple of times buying stuff, and I've only really bought either scenery or World War II stuff. So I've done the same. I've been a good boy.
What was the pledge again?
It's no new periods.
Check.
No new scales for the same period. So no going, I've got British Paras in 28 so I can buy them in 15. Mm-hmm. And no new armies for the same period. So no saying, I've got Germans and Brits so I can get Russians in 28 for World War II.
I don't think I ever agreed to the no new armies bit.
Oh, I did.
I think you just made that bit up on your own.
Yeah, just weak, Shuck. Weak you are.
Well, it was. It was.
Are we going to count the Planet 4 box that I bought?
You didn't.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Well, put it this way. Given the trip that me and Mike are going to be making in a couple of weeks' time, I don't think either of us are going.
You guys are just doomed, and unfortunately, you picked the wrong weekend. So even if I could go, I can't. Rat bags.
Well, that weekend was kind of picked for us, I'm afraid. Details to follow, I think. I think we'll tease that one, but there will be another show coming out because myself and Mr. Hobbs are travelling south. Looking forward to that one. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Planet 4. What happened there, Mike?
I saw it as research.
Oh, okay.
Good argument. I have a better way of getting around that because we have someone at the club who is doing a lot of pushing for Spartan, and he's got a couple of Planet 4 starter sets. So I don't have that problem. I just smile sweetly at AD and get gaming.
Yeah.
I must admit, the one thing that surprised me with the Planet 4 starter set was that it didn't include humans. The two races involved, I just found a little bit of a surprise, that was all.
No, I just mix it up. I must admit, I didn't really look at the race. I just went, that's quite nice. Ooh, look at what you get. I love that.
Oh, okay.
It's mainly because I finally sold my 40k Warhound Titan. The guy gave me the cash, and I was in Firestorm with the cash, thinking I could be good and put this into the bank.
Don't tell me. Was it something else that fell off the shelf?
No, I had to go and physically take it off the shelf.
It was too heavy to fall off. It could have caused serious injury. Is that what you said?
Yeah. I had to help the economy by buying new figures, which has meant
trust me. This pledge gives me plenty of leeway for doing that.
Yeah, I've also started buying some of the foreground 10mm buildings as well. Just for research.
Just for research.
Oh, we're too late. We've done that show.
Yeah.
Right. So did you not get the Cityscape stuff that Drop Zone Commander did?
Oh yeah, put all that together.
But that's a 6x4 table.
Yeah. But yeah, I just thought, I kind of like foregrounds, and I thought I'll just buy one to have a look at it, for research. I bought the smallest one I could find, a little
that's fatal.
A little tiny building.
Fatal.
And now I'm looking at the big corporate headquarters in the bank, which, I haven't got in cardboard, so that'll look lovely on my table. And have you seen the roads they've done? And the pavements and stuff?
Fatal.
Yeah. I tell you what, for a 10mm building, God, it's detailed. Each window has got two parts. You've got the window frame, and then you've got the wooden slab that goes inside. For 10mm, there's 100 windows in this one building.
Tell you what, mate, I'm very glad my pledge didn't include buildings.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, because you got mad on the That resin stuff, didn't you?
No, that was Mr. Shuck.
Oh, that was...
No, that's me.
That was you on it.
But he's blaming me.
It is your fault.
It's quite amusing proof that even Neil is not immune to the siren lure of, well, this was featured on Meeples, so I need to buy it.
Well, they look nice. They're pretty.
Yeah, I'm going to be buying the Roman Villa.
Very nice. Yes, it is nice. Yes. Depending on what order this comes out in, you may actually know what we're talking about yet, or you may not, because I haven't actually kind of finalised the order that some of these shows are being produced in. So, if we've talked about CDE, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. If you haven't had the CDE show yet, you'll be kind of...
Go read the blog.
Go with the blog. Yeah, so there's that, and then, other Kickstarters. Yeah, then we've had, there's the Great War Kickstarter.
That's tasty.
Yeah, that's going to be nice.
Yes, nice looking figure renders, anyway, from what we've seen.
It's going to be nice. And again, a board game. I mean, 2015 is turning into the year of the board game for me. Yeah. I bought 4 so far.
Yeah.
One of them I bought in 2014, Dungeon Saga.
Yeah, that doesn't count anyway, so you're fine on that one.
Yeah, quite.
The thing with the Great War, I think, it's one of the ultimate ironies that having it's like 2 weeks after selling a 28mm World War I army, I end up looking at a World War I board game, especially since I won't want that. I'll never play World War I.
Yeah, board games are different, aren't they?
Well, this is it. But I mean, the fact that this is, but it's the start of something, isn't it? Because Will's already turned around and gone, okay, well, we're going to be expanding this range anyway. But the board game looks interesting. It looks a little bit. It looks a slightly different take on it. As far as it looks like a very different variant of Command and Colours, which in itself is good because some of the Command and Colours variants are, let's say, a same game with different figures. But it's nice to have something which looks like it's going to be quite different. Potentially doing the whole thing in 15mm, which means you don't get the disparity in scales that you have in something like Memoir 44, with the tanks and the guns and the infantry. And it means that it's going to be good for people who want to wargame in the period because you've got some nice 15mm armies. Playing through the mud and the blood in 15mm. That might be interesting.
Yeah.
But then it wouldn't be a board game. I think that's kind of the loophole I was looking for here anyway. So. The one thing the Lardies don't do, actually, is a company scale Western Front World War I game.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah, Mayhem Evolve.
Yeah, but having said that, I mean, with the amount of figures that you get in the base game of Great War, for example.
Yeah.
You should be able to do Through the Mud and the Blood.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So,
it'd be quite nice to do it in 15, actually, just for change.
Yeah, it's as far as I can see, it's a dual purpose purchase. Win-win.
It's a board game.
It's a board game.
Really, it's a board game.
Yeah.
I must admit, I would love to see a Gallipoli game come out.
Well, they have kind of hinted that they're likely to do Gallipoli, aren't they?
Mm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I must admit, I can't see it happening for a year.
No.
But they have hinted at the fact, so that's something that's worth keeping on. I mean, obviously, by the time this comes out, funding would have finished for it because it finishes on the 6th of March or whatever it is. But I mean, they've reached their funding. They've over doubled their funding target and what have you. So I think we're pretty much guaranteed to see it. I think it's August. No, it's June, isn't it? June, July.
10 days. 10 days to go as we're recording this. It's at 55k out of 25k. 750 backers nearest Emmett.
Yeah, and it's due for release middle of the year, isn't it?
That's what they said. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was quite surprised that they didn't include going for expansions and stuff in the base thing. But I suppose it's one of the ways that they avoid creep of the project.
Yeah, I think he's been sensible. He's obviously got it ready. The rules are written. He's done the prototyping. You know, they know what they're doing with the plastics.
And to be fair, he's copped a lot of flack for it as well. I mean, okay, it's his first Kickstarter, and there's been a couple of little misfires on it. But having said that, there've been some people on there which have really kind of go, well, why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? And it's because he's kind of stuck to his guns and gone, no, this is the scope of what we're doing.
I'm going to keep my mouth shut here because I can wax very lyrical and very fed up with people on Kickstarters with entitlement issues.
Yeah.
And we've done it on Twitter and in blogs, haven't we? Obviously,
yes.
It doesn't need revisiting.
Well, we did. I mean, we only tweeted a couple of days ago before recording this about Kickstarters, and we said, well, maybe we should do a Kickstarter show, because we did record a Kickstarter show. It was myself, Hobbsy, and Mr. James recorded a Kickstarter show, and after having recorded it, at the end of the recording, we kind of went, no, we can't possibly publish that.
Not without copious use of the bleep button.
No, it was...
and a good lawyer.
Lawyers are more...
Yes, the lawyers would have been needed. But it is interesting to see the difference between companies that get it right and companies that get it wrong. And we've been fortunate to deal with several companies that get it right, or have gotten it right, and unfortunate to deal. I mean, luckily, I think I managed to dodge. Well, other than
there have been a couple. Which have taken an awful lot longer than they should have, that I have been involved with. There has been one that I'm very glad I didn't get involved with in hindsight. I'm carefully not naming names here. And there have been a couple that I've looked at and gone, you didn't plan that at all, did you?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mind something being late if they're open and tell us what's going on. It's when the shutters come down and they pretend everything's fine. That's when I worry. That's when I start ranting.
Yes.
But funny enough, when I ranted that, I had an email that night to say that my package is being dispatched.
Which again, I'm sorry, but...
What a coincidence. Yeah.
It's not on. It's a case of, look, it shouldn't be a case of just because somebody publicly rants on a forum and happens to be, or they know is well followed, that all of a sudden they do something about it. I'm sorry, that's not, that's not the thing. I say, and we've seen companies that do it well. We've seen, we've got plenty of examples. We've seen companies that do half of it well.
Let's name them. I mean, Westwind are brilliant. Battle Systems are brilliant.
Yes. I mean, the one thing that has massively impressed me with Westwind, their War and Empire Kickstarter, I think, took off beyond what they ever thought. And obviously we'll discuss this at the time. And the fact that essentially they've disappeared because they've been busy sculpting stuff. They got this huge, massive range of ancients, and they did things like, they ran the Kickstarter really well. They've run the Pledge Manager really, really well. And then they turn around and go, and this isn't going into retail until everybody's got their stuff.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that actually, from a commercial decision, they could have been selling some of these ranges a couple of months ago. And not only do they run a good Kickstarter, not only do they keep everybody in the loop, they stick to their guns with about their integrity and making sure that their backers get what they wanted and get what they pledged for before it becomes to the general public. So it makes sure that their backers are valued.
Yeah.
Which other companies aren't quite so good at.
And they're really good on telling you when stuff's been dispatched.
Yes.
I knew about a week before I was going to get my stuff, and then a few days before I had an email to tell me it's been dispatched, and then the day before I had, an email from the courier service to tell me that Dave from the courier service will be at your house at 12 o'clock. And he was, with a box. And
obviously you picked the right courier service that will actually do that.
Yeah.
Part of the problem, though, we are degenerating into a long rant on Kickstarter series, despite saying we weren't going to.
Yes.
Is that some companies have set expectations that other companies that ought to know better then try to live up to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can fill in names on that to taste. I personally think that the point of Kickstarters always was, at least when the Kickstarter people put it up, is its way of people providing advance funding for something that otherwise wouldn't get made without the advance funding. Now, some companies have chosen to use it as basically a pre-order system, and then chosen to embellish the end result with massive amounts of bonuses and backer bonuses. And the problem with that is that they have set unrealistic expectations for some people who now expect that every single Kickstarter has to provide them with this. And sorry, it won't.
Yeah, exactly. And
end of rant.
Yeah, you find that. I mean, we've seen that on multiple different forums, on different Kickstarters we've been involved with, where people have gone, well, X Kickstarter we did this, and Y Kickstarter they did that. Some Kickstarters, okay, Conan gave away massive amounts of miniatures.
Yeah.
But having said that, when you've got 17...
We hope they budgeted for it.
Well, I certainly hope so. But, I mean, when you got... over $3 million to play with, I suppose.
The beauty of something that goes as mental as that is you can play with economics of scale.
That's
but
it.
When you have people who are ripping to shreds for people who are basically making 5,000 out, have managed to make 5,000 out of a 2,000 Kickstarter because they aren't getting the special toys that everybody else is giving them, all I can say is, if you're listening and you're one of those people, if you don't like it, don't back it.
Yeah. Anyway, should we talk to Mark?
Shall we move on to something nicer? Let's talk to Mark.
Indeed. So that was Kickstarters which we were going to talk about. And I think we successfully negotiated it without naming too many names. Although
granted twice.
Indeed, and but I think people may know some of the people we are hinting at. But suffice it to say, Kickstarter remains an interesting place to be. Some Kickstarters are really good. We've been lucky enough to be involved in some really good ones. Some of us have been unlucky enough to be involved in some really bad ones. Probably actually more Mr. Hobbs than I don't think I've actually been involved in a bad Kickstarter. I've been involved in a late Kickstarter.
Depends on the definition of bad or late. I have still one that I pledged in, I think, 2013, and I have not seen a thing.
The very first one I ever pledged for, I'm still waiting for half the stuff.
And if you follow my blog, in fact, no, it's the second one I ever pledged for. And if you follow my blog, you probably know what it is. There we go. January the 7th, 2013. Not seen a thing yet.
Yeah, having waxed on about something we were going to talk about, we'll move not so swiftly on, and we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be chatting with Mark Lewis.
I must get through to Sergeant Watson's position. Jenkins, cover me.
Sir.
Whoa. Sergeant Watson, bring your men in. Withdraw. It's all right, sir. We're enjoying ourselves.
What?
Yes, sir. It's these here chain of command rules, sir. We're having great fun. Chain of command? That's right, sir. It's a challenging but fun blend of command and control. It gives me the freedom I want to fight the way I want to. Never had so much fun, sir. And we've cooked you some sausages. Can't be helped, sir. Me and the lads are staying put. Chain of Command World War II platoon level rules from Two Fat Lardies. They really put you in control. And they're even better than sausages.
Well, we're very pleased to welcome to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. Welcome back, although you never heard him before, to Mark Lewis. Hello, Mark.
Hello, thanks for having me on again.
Again, yes, indeed. You may remember we have talked about the show that never was, and before Christmas we had a fantastic chat with Mark. all about Sword and Spear, and we recorded a wonderful show, didn't we, everybody?
It was fantastic.
It was great, and yeah, for reasons somewhat beyond my control.
Your technical ability?
Yeah, thank you. IT professionals all, but there we go. Anyway, we lost the file. So it's great to have Mark back on the show, and just apologies for taking so long to get around to talking to you.
We lost the file?
I think it means the royal we.
Ah, that will be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. Yeah, it was I enjoyed it last time, and let's hope it's as good again.
Before we chat all about Sword and Spear, as is our normal practice, we just want to find out a little bit more about you, Mark, and how you got started in wargaming, and what you did before Sword and Spear came out. So, how did you get started?
Well, it's a familiar story, I think, to a lot of wargamers. I'm in my 40s now. I started wargaming when I was about 14. Started playing some board war games, some of the Avalon Hill board war games like Squad Leader, and then a little bit of figure wargaming. We did 300 scale modern at a local club, and then Dungeons and Dragons, and that was sort of took me through to my early 20s, but then pretty much stopped wargaming. I did play the occasional board war game, but mainly stopped through sort of university and early career. So familiar story. Started again in my 30s, decided to get back into wargaming. Started playing off with rapid fire in 20mm, but then quickly moved into ancients and medieval wargaming with DBM. So sort of started building up lots of 15mm ancient armies. Played quite a lot of DBM, played the occasional tournament. Played a few other things along the way as well, but I was mainly a DBMer. And then Fog, when that came out, got into Fog.
Yeah.
And again, a few other things as well now. So, as well as my own games, I sort of play some Chain of Command, Saga, Song of Blades and Heroes, Napoleonics, mainly with Command and Colours, and then quite a few board games as well. And then obviously my own games as well.
Obviously, you've had quite a vast experience of various different roles. So what made you decide to design your own?
Well, originally it was I was going to be designing a set of fantasy rules, because I've always been interested in fantasy wargaming, and there wasn't really a good set of big battle fantasy rules. So I started up for actually designing a set of fantasy rules, but a set that would also work for ancient and medieval battles, so built on sort of proper principles of ancient and medieval warfare, and ones that would work for those kind of battles with a fantasy element in as well. But then as I was developing them, I was starting to think, well, those are actually quite a good set for just purely for ancient and medieval battles, and then I sort of temporarily dropped anyway the fantasy element from them, and just started focusing on developing them as a set of ancient and medieval rules.
Okay, so when did you start that process?
It was probably sort of 2 or 3 years ago, I suppose, but not doing it too sort of full on really until a couple of years ago, and they were sort of the rules were getting played occasionally and sort of developing and changing, but it was only really the start of last year, start 2014 or the end of 2013, that they really started to sort of take shape as what they are now as Sword and Spear.
Oh right, so in that sense, quite a rapid development then.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean the rules have been around for say a couple of years, but they're quite different until I sort of made a few changes in terms of the command and control, which is the sort of the main sort of the unique aspect really of Sword and Spear, and that came about just at the start of last year, or the end of 2013, start of 2014, and then it was quite a rapid development from there. Yeah.
Mm.
So it sounds like you almost had like a eureka moment.
Yes, it was. Yeah. With the command and control system and the pulling the dice out of the bag, it was. Yeah.
For me, that is one of the most important parts of the game. The way that the whole command and control section works is the thing that turned this into a really interesting sort of set of rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case with any game. I think the command and control is the most important aspect. I mean, a combat system, you can basically, combat system is getting the desired outcome. I mean, some combat systems have sort of opposed roles, some don't, but really, combat system is just a means to an end. It's getting the outcome that you want. But I think the command and control is the key aspect of many games, and certainly it is for Sword and Spear, yeah.
And there's quite a lot of rules out there that sort of forget that little fact, and they just sort of bolt on a very quick, everybody moves at the same time sort of.
Yeah. I mean, I said some time ago I'd never want to play an I go, you go, everybody moves game again, but then I started playing Fog, which was exactly like that. But yeah, I'm not particularly keen generally on the sort of I go, you go, everybody moves. For games to be more interesting, it does need some sort of restriction on activation, sort of command and control mechanism that restricts what units can do.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit, because obviously we talked just slightly about especially one of the main things that makes Sword and Spear unique. But let's talk a little bit more in general about the game. So, can you tell us what sort of scale the game is, what the units represent, and that sort of thing?
Well, it's a big battle, ancient and medieval war game. So it can be used to recreate historical battles of the sort of 10,000 men aside up to 50,000 men aside, that kind of thing, without really stretching it too far. But it is for the bigger battles of the ancient and medieval periods. It's a unit-based game, so one unit is a fixed frontage and represents. Well, could represent 1,000 or 2,000 men, something like that in a unit. There isn't a defined figure to unit scale, but it's that kind of that sort of order of magnitude. So you might have between 10 and 15 units on a side to represent that to represent that big battle type game.
Yeah.
And the units are fixed frontage, so you can play with any basing system as long as you can get equal frontage units. So I think what I mainly play and what most people play is playing it in 15mm scale with an 80mm frontage. So it's sort of two of the DBA type, that sort of basing system, two of those bases across the frontage representing one unit. So typically sort of 4 DBA bases would be a unit, 2 wide by 2 deep.
Okay.
But that's variable. You can play it as in any scale and with any frontage.
Yeah, conversely, I'm using 120mm movement trays from war bases with my web army using 28.
Yeah,
so
that's what we do. That's
what, 6 infantry or 4 or 5 cavalry, 6 by 2 infantry blocks or 4 or 5 cavalry blocks, which seems to work quite well.
Yeah, that's what we've done when we've played in 28mm with our Saga armies. Unfortunately, on those 120mm frontages with the round-based Saga figures, you only get sort of 4 infantry figures. It doesn't look as good in terms of the sort of you haven't really got that mass of figures. As compared to what you just said with the six frontage on the 100.
Although they're just standard WAB 20mm square bases, which work really nicely, actually.
So you talk about frontage. Does depth matter too much?
Not generally, no. Normally you sort of have, if you're using the DBA standard and both sides are playing the same sort of base sizes, then you're going to have 2 bases deep as well. But depth doesn't matter so much. I mean, it comes into it. If you're moving out of terrain, obviously, if you've got a deeper unit, you're going to be in that terrain a little bit longer, and you've got more of a flank to be flank charged. But really, frontage is the most important thing in terms of making sure both sides have got the same.
Right. So playable in pretty much any scale. Because it's based on element size.
Yeah, that's right. So there's people been playing in 6mm, 10mm, 15mm, 28mm. So obviously any of the normal, or 20mm 1/72 scale plastics, fine as well. Yeah, as long as you can get equal frontage units, you can play it at any scale. Yeah.
And you're doing the standard trick of defining everything in terms of base widths, aren't you?
Yeah. So it makes it easier for movement. The movement is all it's movement units, which is half a base width. Yeah,
and it also gets rid of that question that just gets tiring after a while, which is, can I do it with this scale figures?
Yeah.
Yes, of course you can.
Yes.
Yeah, it certainly is for any scale, yeah. And yeah, I mean, we mainly play in 15mm, but we've played some 28mm games, and I'm trying to get some of my fantasy armies sorted out in 28mm as well, so we'll be playing some of the fantasy games in 28mm. But it certainly looks great when I've seen people on the forum posted the game reports of 28mm, that looks great.
It occurs to me, it's just this second occurs to me, that if you are of the persuasion that is invested in the Kings of War Kickstarter, pretty much every Kings of War unit is a constant standard size.
Yeah, so that would be a good usage for those.
So when you get your fantasy rules out, then you start corrupting Kings of War players.
And likewise, I think there's a lot of Impetus players are picking these rules up as well, because again, Impetus tends to use a standard basing size.
Well, yeah, really, it's the same basing system as Impetus. It's standard size units.
Yeah.
And people that have got their figures based with Impetus, it's even easier because you're picking up one base of figures rather than sort of moving 4 bases of figures like we tend to do with our DBX based figures.
Okay, so that's kind of covering miniatures. Now let's go on to how unit activation works, and basically how the rules are put together. We've already hinted that the command and control system is one of the key things that makes Sword and Spear unique. It's a dice activation system, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you pick dice out of a bag, and each side has their own coloured dice. So you have 1 dice per unit goes into a bag, and you pick dice out. Normally, in a 2-player game, normally 7 dice in each phase. And then you roll you assign those dice to each player, because obviously with 7, one person's going to have more than the other. So typically one person will get 4 and the other person will get 3, although it could go 5-2 or 6-1 obviously as well. And you roll those dice and you assign them to units, and those dice determine what the units can do. So whether the units can do a straightforward advance, which is a forward move, or a more complicated manoeuvre, or charge the enemy. So it's easier to get units to do the easy types of activation, and it's also easier to get better quality units to activate. So your poorer quality units will need a 5 to activate, whereas your better quality units will only need a 3.
This is just using standard dice. Yeah, there's no special dice involved in this. This is just a standard D6, yeah?
That's right, yeah. So 1 dice in the bag for every unit, so you need a good handful of dice to go in this bag, and then you pull them out, assign them to the units, and activate those units. And that phase is repeated a few times over the turn until all the dice are used. So you can only activate each unit once throughout the turn, but you might not necessarily get to activate all of your units. Normally you won't get to activate all of them because you're rolling dice, and obviously if some of those dice come up 1s, they're not going to be able to be used at all, and 2s can't often be used. So a good few of your dice won't be able to be used.
But the distinction here between something like this and something like bolt action is that what's on the dice actually matters, unlike bolt action where you just pull them out of the bag. In fact, they might as well be cards. Yeah.
What's on the dice matters. You pull them out and roll them, and the numbers on the dice allow you to do certain things, the higher numbers being generally better.
Yeah. And you don't have to... Well, part of the choice on this is that you don't kind of say, OK, this dice is going to activate that unit, and then you roll it. It's more of a case of you roll the dice first, and then you have to choose what you're going to do with them, right? Don't you?
That's right, yeah. So you roll them and then allocate them. So, I mean, an average undrilled unit would need a 6 to carry out a manoeuvre, which would mean it could turn, for example, which might seem quite difficult because you need a 6. But obviously, when you're pulling the dice out and rolling them first, quite often you're going to get a 6. So as long as you don't want every single unit in your army to be doing something fancy, quite often if there's just one unit on the flank that you need to turn to face a flank threat, quite often you're going to be able to do it. And if it's very important, you put a general with that unit, which will make it more likely to be able to do that. So you have some control, but it is ultimately sort of how you use those dice that you've rolled. And there's often a lot of choices about what you can do and what you want to do, and often you can't do everything you want to do.
Or worse, you have the one thing you really want to do, and if you do that, you use up the only dice that could otherwise have been used for something else.
That's right, yeah.
And that it's kind of like chain of command in that you sit there with this fistful of dice and go, oh, bother.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what is, again, one of the really interesting rules is once you've allocated all the dice down, so, between 2 players you roll 7 dice, you may only have, if you roll ones and twos, you've lost those. So maybe you put, say, 5 dice down between the two players. The way that the units then are then activated is from lowest dice to highest dice.
Yeah.
So, like you say, if you put that juicy 6 onto a unit to get him to do something fancy, it's going to happen right at the end of this particular phase.
Yes, which might not be what you want. So yes, there's also the order to be taken into account. Sometimes you want to flank charge somebody, or you want to turn to face a flank threat, and you need a lower dice to do that because you want to do it first. So there's also the order that comes into it, as well as actually what's on the dice and what you can do with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the fact that both players are essentially moving their troops in the same phase.
Yeah, within the phase, you're activating an order, regardless of whose dice it is. So you'll activate the 2s and the 3s and the 4s up to the 6s. So both players are involved in that at all times. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting the fact that the person who has most dice is the active player, so they get to choose what units activate first.
Yeah.
As far as they get to place their dice first, so the person with less dice can kind of make an informed decision about.
Yeah, they'll have less dice to use. They have seen where the other players put their dice, so they get to react. And sometimes it can be worse to go first, because if you get the most dice and are rolling first but don't roll very well, you can be in a bit of a problem, because you might only be activating 1 or 2 units, and the other person who had least dice might actually get to activate more. But that's just one of these sort of swings in initiative that happens within the game. Sometimes you get good activation dice and you get a lot of units activating. Other times the opponent does that to you, and it's sort of one of these interesting things that happens.
It's a very subtle mechanic in a lot of ways, because there's so many variables going on. Within that mechanic, and so many different things that can possibly happen.
With the order and what you can do with the dice. So there's and sometimes you're thinking, do I want to charge 1 unit in, or do I want to use a 6 to give me a bonus movement and charge in? But I might end up on my own then, isolated, or do I wait and get my whole line in together? And there's a real thing where sometimes you seize the opportunity and it can go your way. Other times you think it's better to keep things together and go in a bit more slowly.
You can also almost play mind games with your opponent just by, you tend to sort of concentrate on certain parts of the battlefield, or whatever I play. There's always sort of one hot spot in any battle. And that's what you concentrate on.
Yeah, and you might get a cavalry battle going on for a couple of turns, and then and everyone's putting all their dice in there and giving bonus dice and activating all the units there as much as they can. Yeah. And then that might sort of finish off, or then the infantry lines clash, and then the focus goes on in that part of the battle.
Yeah, exactly. So you tend to get these little hotspots going off. But now and again, what I try and do when I play is, once I've got a little hotspot, is just put 1 dice on a unit somewhere on another flank.
Yeah.
And just try and distract my opponent, get them thinking, what's he doing over there? I'm probably not doing anything. I haven't got an idea, but it just stops that. It just breaks that chain of thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So there's lots of little mind games in there, which is one of the beautiful little mechanics in there.
So we've got this activation 7 dice at a time. Now, because you're drawing dice, I mean, one of the things that lends to, you mentioned later on in the rules, is that it lends to easily having multiple players with perhaps even multiple armies. Or facing off against each other, because you just have lots of different coloured dice, don't you?
Yeah, and you're still all involved at the same time. So if you have a 4-player game with 2 players on either side, you all roll your dice, and you're all allocating your dice, and then the turn sequence is interactive. So if we're activating units on a 3, and me and the person on my team have both got some units with a 3 on them, we can move those, and then we'll move our 4s, and then maybe the other side moves their 4s. So everyone's involved. It's not one of these games where you move some of your troops and then you wait for the person next to you to move his. You're all involved at all stages, so it does work very well as a multiplayer game.
Okay, so let's move on to movement. So most ancient games tend to be quite involved when it comes to movement. That part of the rule book tends to be quite involved, quite thick about, talks a lot about wheeling and various other bits and pieces. Is Sword and Spear like that?
No, not at all, no. One of my aims was to simplify a lot of those types of mechanics. So I've sort of borrowed things from games like DBA, where you've got a single element move, where you can just move in any direction you like, as long as the corners don't move more than the movement rate. So I've combined that with the more normal sort of straight ahead movement as well. So you can either do a straight ahead move with a small shift allowed, which is an advance, and that's the simplest type of movement to do, or you can do a maneuver, in which case you can move in any direction, and that's harder because you need a higher activation dice. But it means there's no wheeling, there's no formation changes, there's none of that sort of complicated stuff you normally get in slow games down with wheels and double wheels and turns and things like that. It's all either an advance or a maneuver. And if it's a maneuver, you can go any direction you like, just like a sort of single element move in DBA. You just measure the furthest moving front corner.
And again, this all feeds into the activation point where if you've got a unit with, say, a discipline of 4, so you need a 4, 5 or 6 to activate them. So on a 4, you can just do your advance move, but on a 5 or 6, you can do a maneuver.
Yeah.
So you can do something a bit more complicated, but it's going to take effect later in the phase.
Yeah. And if it's undrilled, it'd need a 6 to do a maneuver.
Yeah.
So generally you want to make sure your troops are sort of just marching forward, because that's the easiest thing to do. If you're relying on a plan that involves troops maneuvering all over the place, you're probably not going to be able to do it, and you're going to come unstuck. Maybe there's to be a little bit of manoeuvre on the flanks with the cavalry, but if most of your, what you need to be doing in your plan is having most of your troops sort of marching forwards to contact the enemy, or waiting for the enemy to contact them, not having complicated plans with things turning around and moving backwards and moving all over the place.
So how's that translate with something like a Parthian army, where the object of half the army is to ride up, shoot the crap out of the opponent, and ride back again?
Well, with skirmishers can always carry out a manoeuvre.
Right.
Skirmishers don't need a higher action dice to carry out a manoeuvre. So with your light horse and your light foot, they can always do a manoeuvre. So they can sort of move backwards and move left and right and go all over the place. But you still don't get the sort of, in some other rules where you're doing those kind of things, doing wheels and double wheels and things to move them into the position you want, that slows it down. Whereas in Sword and Spear, you're just measuring simply corner to corner, putting the unit where you want it to end up. So
and skirmish units are still just a base worth of figures, even if you choose to represent them with fewer figures spread out. Or
it's still the same size base. Yeah.
Of course, it's the beauty. It's like in Impetus. You can have effectively diorama type bases. So especially when you talk about Parthians, you can have the classic light horse circle with archers and most of the bits and pieces.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just formed troops. You can
That's right, yeah.
You can do all sorts of stuff with it.
And you can put as many figures on the base as you want. You should have some way, hopefully, of distinguishing between heavy foot and medium foot and light foot. But if you want to, if you're short of money, you can have less figures on the base, or you're short of painting time and you want to get playing, you can have less figures on the base. And if you want it to look more like a sort of formed unit of heavy foot, you can have more figures on the base. It's up to you.
This is something we probably should cover, is the different types of units that you get in a particular army. So you've got your infantry, your cavalry, plus a few extras, really, aren't you? So infantry, you get your light troops, which are your skirmishers.
Yeah, light foot. It's the standard sort of troop types, really, that you get in lots of other these sort of element type games, light foot, medium foot, or heavy foot. Yeah.
And again, the same thing with cavalry, with your light horse against skirmishers, medium horse, general, and then your big heavy cavalry. Plus, obviously,
there's light horse or cavalry, but yes,
of
course, there's different armor types that can come into it as well. So effectively, your knights are going to be heavily armored or heavily armed cavalry. Yeah.
Yeah. So from these subset of different unit types, which is nice and small, and that sort of dictates how far units can move. You've then got these extra characteristics, which we'll probably come on to a bit later in a bit more detail. But the characteristics give the bit of flavour to the individual units, which make them more.
types and sort of fighting ways of fighting, like having impact or spears. There's not too many, and you can have quite often you have troops with no extra capabilities, so you would just have quite a lot of ancient cavalry. Will just be cavalry with nothing extra at all, and they would be just the sort of standard type of cavalry you get in a Roman or Carthaginian army. But some troops do have extra capabilities to reflect their fighting style.
What about moving a few units? You can do that with skirmishers?
Only with Lightfoot, yeah. So the only penetration is with Lightfoot. Everyone else has to wait and find a gap to move through.
But it means that you can, for example, you can activate your Lightfoot. They can chuck some javelins at an enemy and then retreat behind a nice unit of heavy infantry just to their rear.
That's right, yeah.
Which brings us really onto combat, good old-fashioned combat.
Okay, so again, combat is it uses a mechanic that I really like because again everybody's involved. A lot of people are used to the old roll to hit, roll to save. Roll to hit, roll to wound, roll to save. It's a bit different from that, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. Each unit has a strength, which is both the number of hits it can take and its base combat dice. So most units are strength 3. Light troops, that's light horse and light foot, are strength 2. And the only strength 4 units is heavy foot. So everything else is strength 3. So that means they can take 3 hits before they are routed, and it means they start with 3 dice in combat. Now, extra dice in combat can be gained through having impetus, which is when you get a dice, when you're activated in most situations. And there are some situations where you don't get impetus. For example, cavalry fighting elephants don't get impetus, so cavalry can't get that extra dice against elephants. And most of those situations are the normal situations you'd expect in an ancient and medieval war game. So sort of spears are good against cavalry, pikes are good against everyone. And most troops don't get impetus if they're fighting in difficult terrain, that kind of thing. So you get this extra dice for having a dice, for being activated and having an activation dice. And then there are a few extra situations where you get extra dice, for example, flank attacks or having more units in combat or being uphill. But it's a very sort of short list. Or that is it, really. That is the list of extra dice you get. So there's not sort of huge lists of modifiers or extra dice or anything like that. But that's basically it, that you get a number of dice. So each side in the combat gets a number of dice to roll. You roll those dice and you line up. You pick the top 4, if there are more than 4, and you line them up from highest to lowest and pair them off and compare them. So one side's highest dice is compared with the other side's highest dice, the next highest compared with the next highest. And then if you've doubled the opponent's dice, you cause a hit, and if you've exceeded it, you cause a discipline test, which means they roll against their discipline, and if they fail that, they take a hit. So yeah, it's pretty simple. There's nothing to look up really in the rules. Once you've played a couple of times, there's no tables, there's no lists of modifiers or anything like that to look up. It's your unit strength, whether you get impetus or not, and then that short list of extra dice you can get, and you roll them and compare them. Yeah,
so it's simple. Opposed dice roll. So combat by its very nature is simultaneous.
Yeah.
Okay, one question. Why only compare the top 4? If a unit has been in a position where you manage to get 6 dice against another unit that's only got 3, why do you not allow that unit to use all its 6 dice?
I can't remember if I ever actually play tested it with using all of them or always picked 4. It seemed to work with 4. 4 is the most hits that a unit can take. And it could end up being quite sort of excessive results if you used if one side has a lot of dice against the other ones, it would end up being quite excessive, and quite, as it is, at least the underdog does have a chance here, even if they're rolling 9 dice to your 3, the underdog isn't likely to win, but at least might not get completely wiped out. Whereas if you were using all of the dice, it would be too much likely that the side with the least dice would get wiped out straight away. So there was I can't remember if I ever tried it using all the dice, but I certainly tried using different numbers of dice, and it seemed like in the playtesting, keeping the top 4 dice for speed of combat resolution and for the types of results it could lead to seemed to be the best number.
And to be honest with you, I actually quite like that mechanism, just simply because it kind of weights the combat result on the number of dice you roll, because if you're rolling 6, 7 and 8 dice, and you're only picking the top 4, well, the top 4 of those dice are usually going to be pretty good. Yeah. It's going to be the 5s, 6s and 4s.
Yeah.
Whereas your opponent, if they're just rolling 3 dice, it's luck of the dice. It really comes down, you've got more chance of getting higher numbers against their lower numbers.
Yeah.
Which probability-wise helps, because, so we haven't mentioned it, if you can't match a dice, so say, you roll 4 and the opponent rolls 3, then the side with the lowest dice puts a sort of virtual 2 in place.
Yeah, and again, it's for a similar reason. If those counted as 1s, they
pretty much always get ahead, wasn't it?
Yeah, the unit is virtually guaranteed to be wiped out.
Yeah.
For example, if you've got light troops being attacked by cavalry or heavy foot, they'd be virtually guaranteed to lose. I mean, as it is, they're certainly not likely to win, and they are quite likely to die. But if those dice counted as 1s, or if every dice that the opponent rolled counted, it would just be a foregone conclusion. Whereas as it is, if they do roll well with their 2 dice, at least they might sort of hang in there for another turn and just about survive.
And to add on to that, you've got the effects of armour as well.
Yeah, the armour can affect the dice. Armour generally helps you if you lose. So armour doesn't make you more likely to kill the opponent, but if you've lost some of those dice rolls, your armour can mitigate that. Armour or heavy armour makes it harder to kill you, and it doesn't actually make you fight any better in terms of killing the opponent.
Okay. Do you want to explain how that works?
Well, if you're armoured and you've lost a dice, you can put one of yours up. Put the opponent's dice down, sorry, I could have the right way around. And if you're heavily armoured, you can put 2 of the opponent's dice down, or 1 down by 2. So it means, if you've lost one of those dice by 1, you can turn that into a draw, or maybe you've been doubled and you turn that into a win, but not doubling by the effect of your armour.
Okay, so you're mentioning about combat strength, strength of a unit determining how many dice it rolls,
yeah.
And then you talk about the results either unit take hits or they're disordered.
Or they take a discipline test, yeah.
It's like a discipline test.
And if you fail your discipline test, that is a hit. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So there's only one sort of way of recording the effect of casualties and disorder, and that is in hits. So all the hits are a combination of morale, disorder, casualties, disruption, all the kind of things that can affect the unit are all represented by the number of hits it's taken.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So does the number of hits that unit has taken then affect its strength in combat?
No, it doesn't. No, not except for a few cases where. With some particular weapon types, like spears and pikes, they only really work when you are fresh, and that is when you haven't taken any hits. Also, cavalry and large units get a bonus combat dice when they haven't taken any hits. But otherwise, the number of hits you've taken doesn't actually have a detrimental effect on the number of dice. Doesn't have a detrimental effect on your fighting ability in these rules.
Okay, so basically what we've done here is that rather than thinking about morale, as a separate consideration, that it's all part and parcel of unit casualty and everything else.
Yeah.
So you've done away with in effect with almost like the separate morale checks. Oh, I've taken a hit, therefore, this unit's been damaged, therefore it must take a morale test as part of the whole combat process. That's kind of integrated into the whole thing.
Yeah. The hits represent all the sort of morale, casualties, all those kind of things that can affect a unit and make it more likely to rout. So when the unit does rout, it's a combination of the casualties it's taken, which aren't likely to be very high in reality. But the morale and this sort of disruption fatigue, all those things are built into that hits number. So yeah, there's no need for any separate morale checks or anything like that. It's all just based on the number of hits the unit's taken.
Okay, and when a unit has taken its the number of its number of hits equivalent to its strength, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So once it's taken those number of hits, what happens to it? Is it removed or does it retreat?
It routes and it's removed. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to do to speed up the game compared to some other games where the unit routes and stays on the table, I wanted it just to be removed. It's done for the battle. It's routes and it has nearby troops have to take a discipline test for the effect of that unit routing. It's normally any units immediately left or right of it in a line and within its movement rate behind it, they would take a discipline test, which is seeing it route, also possibly it routing through them, but that isn't sort of actually represented on the tabletop. The unit is just immediately removed.
Right. Okay, so that's movement combat. How do you win the game?
You win the game by destroying half of your opponent's, well, pretty much half of your opponent's units. The strength of the unit also contributes to something called army level. Well, it's the strength of the unit, but +1 if it's a mounted unit. So that contributes to the army level, and that army level is worked out before the game. When you've taken losses to reach a third of your army level, you have an army morale test, which means every unit in the army takes a discipline test. And when you've taken losses at each half your army level, the army routs, and the whole army is just removed, the army breaks, and the opponent has won.
We talked about discipline tests. I don't think we've actually said how they actually work.
A discipline test is just rolling your discipline or higher. So your discipline is a value that represents the sort of fighting ability, your morale level, your discipline, how sort of experienced that unit is, all built into one number. So an average unit has discipline 4, a veteran or elite unit has discipline 3, and a poor quality unit has discipline 5. So those are the numbers you need to activate. Those are the numbers on the activation dice that you need to activate the unit, but they're also the numbers you need to roll to pass a discipline test. So an average unit has to roll a 4+ to pass a discipline test. If you've got a commander attached to the unit, those discipline values are improved, i.e. they go lower by 1. So a discipline 4 unit with a commander attached would need to roll a 3 or higher to pass a discipline test.
All right, so again, we have one like an integrated stat. So a more experienced, more well-disciplined unit. Let's say a veteran unit of Roman legionaries, for example. Not only are they easier to order, but they're more likely to maintain their discipline at a point where they're in battle.
That's right.
So it's all kind of integrated together.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
It's actually quite clever because we haven't mentioned commanders yet, and it's probably worth having a little chat on how they work. But the fact that the discipline value is that's the value you use to activate the units. That's the value you use to try and save off any hits that they've taken, or sorry, to save off any discipline tests they've just taken. It means there's very few stats in this game. You literally have 2 stats. You have the discipline level, which is either as you say 3, 4, or 5, and then you've got strength, which is the number dice you roll. And
the strength is standard for each unit type. There's not anything you have to remember for a particular army. You know that if you've got medium, put their strength 3. If they've got heavy, put their strength 4. Yeah.
So that brings us rather seamlessly onto army lists, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah. I've got there's lots of army lists online. The way I've done it is kept all the army lists, all the references to points, etc., out of the rulebook, and put those all online to be downloaded from my website. So there's a document on there which details the points formula if you want to use a points-based game.
Points?
Then there are points, I'm afraid. And then there are army lists for most of the main sort of ancient and medieval armies. I think there's probably close to 100. I haven't counted, but I think there's probably close to 100 on there now. I occasionally add more, mainly when people request them. So yeah, there's most of the main ancient medieval armies on there now.
So what? So saying most. I mean, what sort of period does Sword and Spear cover? I mean, is it the standard biblical era through to the start of gunpowder?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the sort of 3000 BC to 1500 AD, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, well, there's not much before 3000 BC, and really, there's not much before 1000 BC, I suppose. And you can sort of stretch it a little bit at the other end. I think some people have tried playing some of the early Renaissance games, giving firearms a little bit longer range, so you can stretch it a little bit at the other end, but really up to the wider introduction of gunpowder weapons, yeah. And I've mainly focused on the sort of Western Mediterranean and sort of Western armies. So I haven't done, and I'm not planning on doing any army lists for Chinese, the Japanese, that kind of thing. Just really because it's not something that I've got any expertise in at all. Some people have discussed it on the forum, and obviously people are welcome to do their own army lists and use the rules for that sort of warfare. But I haven't written the rules with a view to using them for sort of the more Eastern armies at all. So it's not something I've really got much knowledge of.
Right.
So when it comes to the armies, there's a sort of particular formula, really, isn't there, for how these armies are put together? So we have commanders who we've sort of mentioned earlier, who are there to help with discipline levels and also for giving orders.
Yeah.
There's two different types of commanders. There's the general, and then there's captains, I believe.
Yeah, well, the generals have a higher command range. There's no other difference really. The generals command troops further away.
So obviously, when your troops are outside of the command range for a commander,
then their discipline actually goes down by one, so they become harder to activate. So you really don't want to get troops out of the command range of the commander. But the command ranges are relatively low, so you've got to keep your army reasonably close together. If you do start sending troops off on wide flanking manoeuvres, unless they take a general with them, they're going to soon get out of command. I mean, one move from light horse can put them out of command. Because the movement rate of light horse is higher than the general's command range, or higher than the captain's command range, rather. So you can easily get your troops on the flanks out of command, and then they become harder to activate, and also harder to pass. If they get involved in the fight, it's harder for them to pass the discipline tests.
And it is worth noting that commanders are relatively expensive when when comparing it to troops. So
they're about the captain's about the cost of a typical unit.
Yeah, so you really do have to plan your army well as far as how many commanders am I really going to need. And of course, part of this starts coming into things like, for example, if you've got a Roman army, they're generally a bit more compact. But having said that, they're easier to control with fewer generals. When you start getting into barbarian armies, if they work as you would expect, you would need more commanders to make them more flexible.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. When you've got if you've got an army of mostly veteran troops and mostly, no undrilled troops like Romans, yes, you can afford to have less commanders, because even if your troops do get out of command, if they are discipline 3, then that only puts them down to discipline 4, so they will work reasonably well still. But if you get discipline 4 troops out of command, then they're going to be in trouble.
And there is something else the commanders can do, which is to rally.
To rally units, so they can rally units that are taking hits. So at the end of each turn, they get a chance to rally hits and units. So your commanders it's very important what you do with your commanders, because at the end of each turn is when you get to move the commanders, so they can move and try and rally hits. But you also need to think about where you want your commanders for the next turn's activations, because if you've got a unit that is threatened in the flank and you need to turn it, then you probably want a commander with it. Or sometimes if you've got a unit that's going to be fighting, you might want a commander with it so it can have more, it might fight sooner, or it's got more options of what dice it will be able to fight on. I mean, for example, if you've got a commander with a discipline 3 unit, that will be able to fight on a 2 on an activation dice. And sometimes you put that commander there, and then you get a double 2 on the next phase, and that's great because you can use it as a bonus, whereas otherwise those 2s would have been useless.
Actually, that's something we haven't touched on is, again, going way back to the activation, is
bonus dice. Yes.
Bonus dice, yeah.
Yeah. You can doubles and 6s give you bonuses. If you put a double of a certain number on a unit that would normally activate it, that will give you a bonus, and a 6 would also give you a bonus. And that
but of
bonus
course,
can be,
putting the double on costs you a dice.
yeah, so that's one less unit. That's one less unit you're going to be able to activate. And this ties in with what Mike was saying about the focus being on one part of the battlefield. If you roll some doubles and you give those to one part of the battlefield, you're not going to be able to do things everywhere else. So it does tend to be this thing where you get a fight going on first, quite often the cavalry fights, and you put your bonus dice in there. Or before the battle even really gets underway, quite often you give bonus dice to skirmishers for shooting. So you do get this sort of thing where the skirmishers do their little bit first, and quite often they sort of then retire out of the way and don't play any further part in the battle because you're using your dice in the main sort of fight after that. So you get this sort of thing which matches what generally happened in battles, where the skirmishers do a little bit at the start, and quite often you get a bit of a cavalry fight going on, and then you get the main infantry lines clash, and the focus sort of changes throughout the battle on those different areas.
So you don't get that horrible web thing where people spend all their time using skirmishes to stop figures for other units moving.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Once your skirmishers have done their bit, quite often they just do retire and you keep them out of the way then. I mean, it may be that a unit of light horse gets on the flank or rear of an opponent once they're fighting, and they can have a bit of an impact there. But certainly you'd like for after that little bit of an exchange of shooting at the start, quite often they then don't play any further part in the battle.
It is true. It is true that things like flanking light horse can seriously ruin your day.
They certainly can. Yeah. Yes, you have to keep an eye out.
Which they should.
Yeah.
But the other thing that is again quite nice, and it comes down to the way that these rules are. The rules are relatively simple, but they layer beautifully. Is you don't want to start sacrificing units, even though you can turn around and say, "I'll just sacrifice them. They're just some skirmishers." Well, as soon as you've lost that base, you've also lost the dice that's used to activate them.
Yeah.
And also, it also counts towards the morale level that you're going to hit when your army breaks.
Yeah. So a unit of Lightfoot will only count half as much as the unit of Heavyfoot towards the army morale, but you do lose that dice. So
exactly.
If you pull that unit of Lightfoot back and leave it behind, it's still having an effect because it's giving you an extra dice that you're going to be using to activate your other units, so that it's just being there, it's having an effect. Whereas, if it dies, you lose that dice, and suddenly, the gradual sort of morale effect of your units dying is realised in the number of dice you've got in the bag, and suddenly you'll find that your opponent is pulling more dice out of the bag, and then they're taking the initiative in each phase.
Yeah, so it's almost like a self-fulfilling morale level. It's similar to what happens in Saga, I guess, where you don't want to lose your Saga dice, so you tend to pull units back which are taking a beating, because you need to protect your assets. You basically the number of dice you've got in a turn are your assets to play with. If you've lost them, you're boned, really.
Yeah, and even something like I say about charging a light horse into flanks and rear, it could still be a risky move, because if you charge light horse into the flanks of knights, it only takes 2 hits to kill those light horse, and they can still lose that battle even when they're charging the flank of a decent unit. So it's still a risky thing to do. Once you've charged them in, then normally you're probably not going to activate them. You're just going to let them sit there, and your frontal units are going to get an extra dice in the combat. But it's that initial charge, your light horse could easily die, so it's not. It's still a risky move to do.
So we had a little bit of a digression, because we were talking about the way the army lists are put together. So again, we got our commanders. We buy some of those. It's a point system. We'll get over it.
Yeah,
that told me.
Yeah, I just knew you were gonna go off on one. You've then got 2 different types of troops. You've got your core troops and you've got your support troops. So do you want to talk a bit about how that sort of works?
Yeah, well, I've deliberately kept the army lists more flexible, I think, than most other games' army lists. Partly for sort of ease of putting together your armies, but also because a lot of army lists aren't really built on that much knowledge. A lot of it is supposition about how troops were equipped, how many of particular troops were in particular battles or in particular armies. So I've deliberately kept them quite flexible. You have core troops, which has to be half your army, and that is obviously in the Roman army, it's your legionaries. In a Carthaginian army, it'll be your sort of African spearmen. It's your main troops that made up the bulk of the army. And then there are the support troops, which are the auxiliaries and the lights, quite often the light troops, those sort of extras that you may have some of or may not.
And some of those troops are restricted, aren't they?
Yeah, they. If core troops are restricted, you can only have 2 units of them, and if support troops, well, you can only normally have 2 units of any support troop, or if they're restricted, you can only have 1 unit. So I haven't gone down the route of having sort of a minimum and maximum of each type of unit. I've just gone for this sort of flexible. Yeah, they're either core or they're support, and they can be restricted within that as well.
Right.
I mean, it does mean that some people might say, well, by allowing this flexibility, you're allowing people to sort of build some quite unhistoric armies. I mean, that's true. You could, based on the lists as they are, I think you could probably build a Roman army with no legionaries, but that would just be a bit silly. I mean, if you want to play with a Roman army, then surely you want to use some legionaries. So the lists are meant to be guidelines. They're not meant to be strict sort of competition level army lists to enforce sort of balanced points level games. It's really more guidelines. These are the typical troops you'd have in an army. And when I said troops are restricted, it's because, there probably weren't many of those troops available. But they're meant to be treated more as guidelines, rather than a list to sort of build the best possible army out of.
Yeah. The other thing that we've then got, again, as part of the army list, is we've got the unit types, and for example, a Greek hoplite, would count as a sort of medium infantry, but then you've got these characteristics that you can basically layer again on top of these army types.
Yeah.
So you've got a list of sort of, again, it's not a huge list, it's quite nice, but it just gives you a bit of flavour. So things like spears, which you can give to units, and then which counter the cavalry's impetus, so when they charge in.
Yeah, it's a relatively short list, but it is just enough to reflect the differences in the main types of troops, like say pikemen, spearmen. Some troops have impacts. The troops that would sort of charge hard, like knights, or sort of Gallic warband types that have an impact characteristic, which means they can be quite devastating when they charge. And you could be undrilled, which means it's harder to activate to do anything, to do a manoeuvre. But yeah, it's a relatively short list, and some troops will just, quite often troops will just have no capabilities at all. And then there's missile weapons within that as well. So obviously missile weapons will have their missile troops, whether it be javelins, slings, bows, or longbows. Again, there's not lots of different types, just the basic broad types of missile weapon.
We've also then got sort of special features, which are quite interesting. So we've got rules in there for trains, baggage camps.
Yep.
Obviously the elephants, camels, large units, which...
Yeah, again, just those extra few sort of little things that you need to give it the flavour, really, some of the extra sort of more exotic troop types, yeah. Yeah.
And of course the chariots, with large sort of stick on the side of them.
Yeah, side chariots, yeah.
One thing we haven't mentioned at all at the moment is stratagems.
Yep.
Again, this is something you can buy for your army, aren't they?
If you're doing a points-based game, yeah, you can buy stratagems, and there's things like flank marches, ambush. What else have we got? We've got
scouting.
Yeah, scouting, and there are I can't remember what they're called now. Things
what are
the things that artists put in front of them?
Stakes.
Stakes, that's what they're called. Yeah, I think what they were called. Yeah, stakes.
Medium rare.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's just a few little sort of things you can do like that, and some of it is just really if in a particular scenario there might have been an ambush, then you can use the ambush stratagem, and it's just to give a little bit of sort of variability and there's things like flank marches that you can sort of try out to add a bit of variety to your games, really. Because if we talk about the fantasy rules, there's some sort of more scope for interesting stratagems there, really, with the fantasy rules. So there's going to be a few different ones going in there.
That's almost a seamless segue into our next section.
Fantasy, you say?
Fantasy, yeah. That is the base game, and obviously we talked about arm lists and what have you. So. Plans for the future, and I don't know, fantasy. You said,
yeah. I'm currently working on the fantasy version of Sword and Spear.
But it originally started as a fantasy
Well,
game.
yeah, it did. So it's kind of going back to where it started. Yeah,
Right, okay.
It's adding in those bits I took out when I changed it from a fantasy to a historic rule set. Yeah, so it's adding back in. I mean, it's not putting a lot in really. It's going to be exactly the same core mechanisms. It's just adding in the obvious extra stuff you need for fantasy, like magic and monsters. Which really covers it all, doesn't it? That's it.
It's basically magic, monsters, and flyers, isn't it?
Yeah. It's it's going to be a set of fantasy rules that is grounded in reality. So your spearmen are going to act like spearmen, and because they're going to be the same rules as from the ancient medieval game. So it's going to be for people that want a set of fantasy rules that give the feel of the sort of battles you might get in fantasy literature, rather than I think the sort of things that you get in some other fantasy rules, which tend to be sort of very kind of hero driven and magic dominated.
All right, okay. Mike, you've been painting Fantasy Army a bit like that, haven't you?
I've been playing lots and lots of Fantasy Sword and Spear recently.
I think Mike's probably played more than me.
Possibly, yeah. We've been playing a hell of a lot, because it's got my old War Master armies out of the closet and onto nice bases. And the thing that Mark's done, which is really good, is he's not being dictatorial and saying this is your fantasy list, this is your elf list, this is your dwarf list. He's doing the fantasy supplement as a toolkit.
Oh, right, okay.
Which is a really clever way of doing it, because my version of fantasy is completely different to, say, yours, Neil, or to yours, Mike. By having a toolkit there that we can just pick out bits and, look at the figures that we've got in our collection, and go, okay, well, I can base those infantry, maybe I'll do them as medium infantry, or I'll stack them together and they can be heavy infantry, or do them as a big unit. So you've got sort of free reign, and it allows you just to bring in elements and drop things in and try things out. It's a nice system. I'm really enjoying the way it's working so far. From what we've done so far, Mark has released, the different types of units that you're going to get. We've got rules out there for flying, which are great fun actually. Heroes are really interesting in this as well. So you've got little hero characters running around, who can. They're not going to do much on their own, but you back them up with another unit and they're going to get quite interesting. Yeah. And there's lots of things in there. You've got the magic use, which is the latest thing that's just come out now, which we're all sort of trying out. I think once this is finished, it's going to probably change the way that big battle fantasy games are going to be played. So I think it's brilliant.
Sort of the big battle version of open combat.
Yeah, I think it's because it's the toolkit.
I want to think about that, because I think unless you sort of bring out a figure line or you're prepared to do lots of sort of background kind of fluff with the rules, I think it needs to really be a generic set of rules that anyone can use. That is the aim. I've certainly no plans to say to write any fluff or anything like that, or tie it to a specific world or anything like that. It's really it's what you want, how you want to represent your fantasy armies. So I'll be using it. I've got some 15mm fantasy armies. I'll be using it. I've also got some sort of Warhammer figures. I'll be using it for some sort of. I've got some Empire type armies and some Elf armies, and I'll use it with a lot of my historic armies as well. Just adding little bits and pieces to make some of my historic armies into fantasy armies. And certainly the medieval is the easy way to go like that. You can add in a wizard and a dragon, and your medieval 100 Years of War army becomes a fantasy army. But you can also do it with sort of Persian armies, with Indian armies, all sorts of things. Just adding in a few little things from there, sort of few little things maybe from their mythology that ties in with that sort of army to make a fantasy army from a historic army. There's so much sort of possibilities there. So I think you've really got to give players the flexibility to do what they want with their armies. Because anytime I see a new set of fantasy rules on the market, if they have sort of restricted army lists for 10 or so armies, you just think, well, I'm not necessarily going to be able to use all the figures I've got in those rules, because they might not have rules for some of what I've got in my collection. So that sort of turns me off about some of the existing fantasy rules. it does mean if you go down that route, it allows you to do some things in terms of giving armies special abilities and things like that it's more difficult to do with the way I'm going. So there are some things I probably aren't going to be able to do that you can do with a system like that, but I think I'd still rather have the flexibility of people being able to design their armies as they like.
I would be surprised if there's stuff in here that you can't do.
Well, yeah, I think some of it I might be able to do with stratagems,
yeah,
and with the choice of magic and things like that, which is why I was saying about stratagems. There's more sort of scope with fantasy of doing some interesting stratagems. It's possible that I'll put some more stratagems in that will really affect the way the army fights to give some of those sort of what would be special rules for an army in another rule set. But they can't have too much of an impact. Yeah, because then the sort of points balance gets very difficult to keep track of.
I think the one that's probably been the hardest one to do was probably the one we all started with, which was the undead.
Yeah.
Just because they fight differently.
Yeah, because I wanted them to be different to the normal way of activating units, to make them fight more like under the command of a necromancer and fight when they're told, rather than having the sort of independence to do things on their own. And not to have the sort of morale effect that normally when we say early, normally hits comprise a morale and a casualty effect. Well, that isn't going to be the case for undead because they're not going to have that sort of morale effect. So they have to be different in the way they suffer hits as well. So hopefully I've sort of made them different enough to give a bit of more that sort of undead flavour and put a bit of variety into it.
We've talked a lot around the rules and mechanics and everything. Basically, if you want to get hold of a copy of this, how do you do so? I mean, it's available in two standard formats, isn't it? Yeah.
There's Sword and Spear. You can get the PDF, which is sells for £6. So you can go on to my website, which is the best way is to probably go from a link from your Meeples and Miniatures or to Google Polkovnik Productions, rather than me giving the actual web address, but it's because I've got quite a distinct name. It actually comes.
Yeah, can we spell that, please? Well, okay. Polkovnik.
Two K's, I think. Polkovnik. Polkovnik Productions.
Right.
It means colonel in Russian. Polkovnik.
I was about to ask that. It's an interesting name.
I took that name when I started wargaming again after sort of my break from it, and my first army was a 20mm Russian World War II Russian army, and I was buying I bought a lot of it on eBay, and I wanted an eBay login, and I chose this Polkovnik as my eBay login because it means colonel in Russian, and my first sort of eBay purchases were my 20mm World War II Russians, who went back in the loft while I was all through my DBM era, and they just came out the loft again a couple of years ago for Chain of Command. That was
excellent.
My Russians have hit the table again. Luckily, I didn't sort of get rid of them all those years ago. But yeah, that's where Polkovnik comes from. But it does mean it's quite a distinct name. So if you Google it, I'm about the only thing that comes up. So that's quite handy. But yeah, Polkovnik Productions is there's a website, and you can go on there and you can buy the PDF, and I will, if you do that, I will email it out to you within a day or so. It's not an automatic download; it gets emailed out.
I can attest to this.
Yeah, in fact, it's actually better because of all this VAT thing. It's actually better now that I've did that in the first place, isn't it? So I wasn't ever hit by this VAT thing that Neil and Henry talked about in the View from the Veranda. Or you can buy the hard copy, which it's a print-on-demand hard copy from Lulu, and there's a link to that on my website as well.
And very nice it is too.
Yeah,
I'm holding it in my hands at this point at this very moment. Yes.
Very pleased with the way it turned out. It's one of these things you never know exactly what's going to happen when you sort of send these files off to something like Lulu, and you get your first trial copy, which was back in June last year. But I was very pleased with it. Yeah, it looks good. I'm pleased with the way the hard copies come out.
It's a 40-page rulebook, and when you get the hard copy, it's full colour. It's bound with a couple of staples, but with a substantial cover. Yes, a substantial kind of a laminated heavy paper cover. It looks really nice. it's a step up from something like, when you imagine those spiral-bound rulebooks that many people put together a few years ago. This really is the next step up. I was quite pleasantly surprised when I got it, because this is the first time I've ever used a print-on-demand service for a rulebook, and I was very pleasantly surprised with it.
Yeah, I was pleased. I mean, I'd had some before, some of the Song of Blades and Heroes rulebooks come through Lulu, so I'd sort of seen the kind of thing they produce. But I'm still very pleased with it. And I mean, it's incredible what you can do these days that you couldn't have done sort of 10 or so years ago, self-producing something like this with sort of things done on a home computer in Word and PDF and a few sort of graphics programs. It is incredible what somebody can sort of do now, really. So yeah, I was very pleased with that. But yeah, that's £14 from Lulu, and if you contact me, if you've done that and you contact me, then I can give you the PDF as well if you buy the Lulu version. So you get both effectively for £14, and then all the army lists are free as well.
Do you have any plans to try and do a print run? A sort of limited sort of...
Well, not sort of plans myself personally. No, I mean, it's not something I'd really thought too much about. I have just been contacted by somebody mentioning the possibility of doing that, and I haven't actually got back to them yet. It's certainly something I'd be happy to sort of discuss with anyone that was interested in printing it. It's the sort of thing that when I went into this, I had no idea if it would sell at all, what sort of interest level it would be, and that's the good thing with something like selling PDFs and selling the hard copy through Lulu. It's a sort of no risk thing. There was no cost to me other than the artwork for the cover. I did everything else myself, all the sort of layout and the pictures and the diagrams. It was all, I did everything myself, so there's no cost to me. And it was really, let's see if anyone wants to buy it. But now it has sort of been quite successful. It's certainly something that I think would be a possibility, yeah. But it isn't something I've sort of pursued particularly.
I was going to ask, because I mean, well, anybody who's read the blog or listened to the show for a while will know that this is a very popular rule set amongst all of us, and it's certainly my favourite set of rules, definitely as far as Ancients is concerned. I'm just wondering, how have they done? I mean, have they been as popular as? We love the game. Have they been as popular with other people?
Well, they've certainly done better than I was hoping for or expecting. So yeah, they've done well. I mean, what it seems to be, and certainly from the sort of the way people have talked about them and some of the reviews people have written, that most people that have played them seem to have liked them. I think because I've provided a lot of information about the game, people get a good idea before they buy it if they're going to like it or not. So obviously somebody, the kind of person that isn't going to like it probably isn't going to buy it because they're going to have seen the information out there about the rules anyway. So I think most people that have tried it seem to have liked it. I certainly haven't heard many or any really negative comment. I mean, one or two people have said they didn't like it, but that's going to be the case with any rules. But I've not heard any sort of actual criticisms really of the rules, so that's been great. And there's been lots of positive reviews. And I think it's sort of taken off in certain gaming groups. So in the Plymouth group, there's a lot of people playing it, and they did an event last year. There seems to be quite a lot of people playing it in Australia. And there was a small tournament at a convention in Australia last month, I think. So it's got sort of pockets where it's done very well, and some people have said it's taken over from this set or that set as our main Ancients rule set at our club. So that's been great, yeah. So yeah, I've been really pleased with the way it's gone and the sales and the reception it's had.
Mark, we've talked about the fantasy version of Sword and Spear. Is there anything else you're working on? I mean, I used to say that, this is your first kind of published set of rules. Is there anything else in the pipeline, something completely different?
Well, this is my first published set of rules, and then the fantasy rules I'm hoping will be published this summer. Most of my I get most time to write rules in the early summer because of my job. And that's when I've got most free time. So I'm hoping over the next sort of few months is when I really get to sort of spend more time tidying up the fantasy rules and writing those and hopefully getting them published this summer. I've got two other rule sets as well, which I've written, which are both available for free. So I've got no plans to actually sell either of these, but they're both available for free through my website and forum. One of them is called Warband, and it's a Dark Ages. It's a sort of a large skirmish, so 50 to 100 figures aside, and it's a card-driven hex-based system using sort of similar mechanics to the Command and Colours games, where you play cards to activate figures.
Okay.
I haven't really done much on that recently. I'm going to try and get in a few games of that in the near future, actually. But it's one of these things where you develop rules, something goes on the back burner, and obviously with the success of Sword and Spear, that's been really my main focus for the last year or so, a year and a half, really. So then things come and go. You think, I'll play a few games of Warband, and when I get round to that, I'll probably do a bit more development on it. But it is sort of complete in that it's a playable game with for Dark Ages armies. I'm planning on adding some sort of Lord of the Rings add-ons to that as well at some point, and some more army-specific stuff. But it gives a good game, but the big limitation in terms of the sort of popularity of that is that it is hex-based and card-driven, and both of those things are I mean, I don't know why card-driven things put some people off, but there's a lot of people say they don't like card-driven games, but the hex-based is more of a thing that's going to put people off, because if you haven't got a hex map to play on, then you can't play it. And having a hex map is a relatively large either investment or in money or time. Mine was time in terms of like drawing out a big hex map. But it certainly does make any games a lot easier to play, and the rules a lot easier to write if it's hex based, because you take out a lot of the sort of fiddly bits that you get with most miniature war games, with sort of measuring and line of sight and all those kind of things. Also, the main reason it was hex-based is to allow for that sort of big skirmish game, but without having units. So, whereas most of those sort of games aim at those sort of numbers of figures, group them into units, which is really something that has to do for the game to work.
Yeah. Because
it's hex-based, it doesn't have to do that. You activate the men in a hex. And I think for sort of Dark Ages battles that sort of size, I don't think there would have been units. It would be the warlord turns up with his 100 men, and this allows that sort of flexibility of saying, like, you 10 men, you go over there, and you do this, and you archers go to that wood and shoot arrows at the enemy, without having people split into distinct units. So it is a complete system. You can get that. I think you can download it from my website, or I can email that out to people. The other one is called Tales of Action and Adventure, and again, it's something I haven't really done much work on recently. It's a skirmish game for the sort of early gunpowder period. So really, anything from sort of pirates and musketeers up to sort of Victorian era or early sort of pulp era. And it includes or will include sort of fantasy and horror elements as well. So it's meant to be a flexible system that can do sort of VSF, it can do gothic horror, pirates with a bit of fantasy thrown in, musketeers, any of those kind of, do sort of shark type scenarios as well. So it can be completely sort of straight historical. It could do pirates against dinosaurs against zombies, that kind of thing. Which is in fact one of the ideas I've got for a scenario for it. So it's still in development. Again, the rules are there; they can be played at the moment, and they're also available for free. So I'm quite happy for people to drop me a line and get hold of them to playtest them. Again, I haven't done a lot of work on them recently, and I hopefully will do some more on those this summer.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're the other two things I've got in the pipeline. I'm not really thinking about anything else, because certainly all of my development time at the moment is either sort of occasional army lists for Sword and Spear, but most of it is the Sword and Spear fantasy. That's most of the time I get to write rules is focused on that, and will be until the summer, and hopefully they'll.
Right. Okay. So it would be a case of once they're published, then you can take a step back and kind of go, okay, so where do we go from here?
Yeah. Think about some other things. I mean, I bought some 54mm gladiators a few months ago, and I started writing some rules for them. But again, the first run through of those didn't work out great, and haven't really got round to sort of doing any more development on those yet either. But I bought the figures, and I bought a big Playmobil gladiator arena that I'll get round to building at some point.
Oh, you got one of those.
Yeah.
You too, huh?
Yeah. I think it'll work great with the 54mm figures. I'm not quite sure where I'm going to put it once I've built it, 'cause it's a lot bigger than I expected. But that'll be fun.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Moving on just slightly from Sword and Spear, because you're quite a keen board gamer as well, aren't you, Mark?
That's right, yes. Yeah. In my group, we generally play board games most weeks at the moment. I try and get a figure war game in as well most weeks, but certainly through the winter, one of the locations where we tend to play figure war games is in one of the guys' garages, and it tends to be a bit cold in the winter. So through the winter, we mainly play board games each week as our regular gaming group. Yeah.
Yeah, because one thing that has been noted, including by the likes of Mr. Whitaker, is the fact that although this podcast is called Meeples and Miniatures, obviously, but when we first started, we kind of did a lot of stuff on. It was quite an even split between wargaming and board gaming.
Yeah.
As time's gone on, I mean, part of it is reflected in both finding kind of a niche of listenership, because let's face it, there are not that many tabletop wargaming podcasts out there as opposed to board gaming podcasts. But also with the fact that I've played an awful lot less board games than I used to, we've kind of moved away from board gaming. And to the point where a few weeks ago, Mr. Whitaker, you kind of questioned whether we should even think about renaming the podcast, didn't you?
Not in as many words.
But that's kind of what you were getting at.
There's not many meeples to be seen at the moment, are there?
No, we seem to be suffering from a national meeple shortage.
Indeed. So, as part of this discussion, funny enough, because obviously we'd previously spoken to Mark, despite the fact that the show never came out, and Mark being a keen board gamer, Mark piped up and kind of went, "Do you want any help with this?" So, as a result, we've kind of gone away and done some thinking, and thought, well, actually, we'll try and do a bit more board game. We'll also try and do a bit more board games on the show. Now, it's still likely to be, quite kind of board game orientated. We're looking at particular styles of board games as opposed to just any board game. But Mark has very kindly agreed to come on and help us out with that sort of thing, haven't you, Mark?
That's right. Yeah. I'd be very happy to. Yeah.
Yes. So all being well, and we haven't actually kind of sat down and really organised our first show yet. But the idea is that probably every third or fourth show, it's going to be more board game dedicated, and we're going to have Mark on as a new presenter. So look forward to chatting to you again, Mark.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah, it'd be good.
Yeah.
Indeed. So that's hopefully something to look forward to. And this isn't the last time you'll listen. You'll hear Mark on the show, but for now, Mark, it's been fantastic to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about Sword and Spear in a show that we finally got recorded.
Well, let's hope the recording works this time.
Yeah, because we're not doing it again.
That's it. I'm afraid if
I
this
don't
recording,
think we'd want to do a third time.
yeah, if this recording fails, I'm afraid that's it. Sword and Spear, bye bye.
Hopefully there's plenty of backups.
I think we've got at least three different copies going at this point.
I did actually remember to restart mine after we quit.
What, you mean the quit that I seamlessly deleted out so nobody knows about it?
That's the one, yeah.
That's the one, right? Okay, fine. Mark, it's been fantastic to talk to you. One thing I think, thank you so much for developing Sword and Spear.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic game. I mean, it is amazing. When you turn around and say, the command and control system was something that kind of came about as a last minute, and it just works so well. It was that was one thing that for us it was a bit of a surprise to hear for the first time. I'm thinking, well, that seems so integral, and yet it almost seems in some ways like it was a happy accident.
Yeah, actually, I should mention it, because I know we did mention it the first time we recorded it, but I should mention where the influence for that came from. Just one last sort of point about Sword and Spear. And it was actually from listening to Meeples and Miniatures.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, it was when you were talking about Chain of Command and bolt action. So it was kind of influenced by the Chain of Command, and this is before I played Chain of Command. So it's before Chain of Command actually came out when you were talking about it on the show. Yeah. And it was thinking about the Chain of Command dice and the rolling dice to activate the units, but also the bolt action idea of kicking the dice out of the bag. And that's from listening to the Meeples and Miniatures show about those rule systems. That got me sort of thinking about how that could be worked into the ancient medieval game I was developing, and that's that was the influence for the command system in Sword and Spear.
So in fact, you are one of the only people to listen to Meeples and Miniatures, and as a result, sell things rather than buy things.
Yeah, I think so. I've also bought a lot as a result of listening to Meeples.
You and me both, mate.
Well, yeah, more in the early days that you're talking about when it was more Meeples. I used to go out and quite regularly buy the board games that Neil recommended.
Yeah, my problem was I caught up about 90 episodes.
Well, I did as well. I went back.
Something like 90 episodes in a massive binge over about a month, and I'm still looking for a copy of Duel in the Dark.
Oh, that was actually one that I sold without ever playing. I bought that after hearing about it on Meeples and Miniatures, and then sold it on eBay without ever playing it.
I hate you.
Neil's probably still got a copy, Mike. You can buy it off him for $5.
Yeah, it's going for 90 quid on eBay.
Was it? Mine didn't go for that much.
I've got all the expansions as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Including Baby Blitz.
Yeah.
What a shock.
It's a cracking game. It really is nice.
I really want to play it.
Although, well, in that case, then I shall have to bring it over to Peterborough.
That'll be tragic.
I mean, we were talking before we come in here about the fact that actually myself and Mr. Whitaker don't actually live, in the grand scheme of things, that far away from each other, and yet I've never been able to visit his gaming club. So that's something I'm going to have to remedy, and we'll have to start, taking games and stuff. Oh, well, that sounds a bit risque. But yeah. So anyway, we digress. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. And all the very best with Sword and Spear in the future. I hope it continues to do really well for you. Really looking forward to seeing the fantasy version. I'm getting ready to pick up a Lord of the Rings army, especially for it.
Brilliant, excellent. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good. It's been great listening to that end of the year show where you all were so nice about Sword and Spear. So it's really appreciated it, and thanks for having me on here.
It's a pleasure, mate. Take care.
Speak to you again soon.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
Cheers.
Well, that was a bit different from the first time we recorded that show, where, I mean, as Mark said, the first show, we ended up doing a review of Sword and Spear after we chatted to Mark. So our chat to Mark was a little bit more waffly, included a few more ideas on his game design, but less on the mechanics because we were going to review them now, which, because we've covered the mechanics in quite some depth, we're not going to, if that kind of makes any sort of sense whatsoever.
Perfect sense to me.
Yeah. Well, I got no idea what you're talking about.
As you'll know, Sword and Spear has been one of our favourite rule sets of the last 12 months. And, one of the best rule sets I've come across in a very, very long time. Real breath of fresh air, and really interesting to hear how a couple of bits came along. I think as the guys mentioned, maybe we should have put in for a royalty.
Yeah, I was thinking that. I've got to go out with a hard copies version at some point.
Hopefully, you'll have gleaned from the interview how the rules work. You've heard us all talk about it to a certain extent, and what a different game it is. What a pleasure it is to play. And it is just that nuance, isn't it? The whole dice mechanic and the way that the two different ways that the orders system and command and control system, and then the combat system, how it all complements each other. I think it's just one of those perfect storms, isn't it? Yeah, it's one of those things that if you kind of look at it, there were some games that, because there are mechanics that you've seen elsewhere. I mean, like, the opposed dice rolling, we've seen things like, Force on Force, for example. That's what it immediately reminded me of. Well, we even go back to things like Stargrim. And, as you said, the drawing the dice out of the bag is similar in some ways to bolt action. And then you've got other bits and pieces which you can kind of pick and choose, and you think, that's similar to what was in this set of rules or that set of rules. But the way that they've been drawn together, it really is a bit of a perfect storm, isn't it?
Yeah, and let's be honest, there's nothing new in wargaming anymore. Every game that comes out has been influenced by other games, which are influenced by other games. There's the whole evolution, but this one I think is just pushed it a little bit more. He's just got something really special there with the activation and the command and control and the tactics that you need to use and the chaos that you get, and I was just sort of thinking over the last sort of 6 months or so, we've been so lucky with rule systems of this type because, we've now got two really good rule systems covering a similar period, which can use a similar basis structure, but give you completely different games, different style of games, different feel from the games. That's been so good because I've always been interested in ancient and medievals and doing big battles, but I've never found a set of rules that I liked. Yeah,
because a lot of the rules tended to be, there's always something about them. I mean, it's interesting. There's on our Facebook page, there's a chap been asking advice about Hail Caesar and 28mm figures. What's the best way to do that? And I know he has decided that he wants to play Hail Caesar, but the very I think the very first advice I would give him is don't play Hail Caesar.
I must admit, the root issue there is if you can to do Hail Caesar justice, you need lots of figures and a big table.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, you can play it with it because it's unit based. You can play it with smaller units, but it rather, to my mind, it rather spoils the look. And I don't have enough forces for Hail Caesar. I rely on Gary from our club who just paints like a lunatic. But if I want to play that kind of thing unit based, I'll be playing and it won't be Hail Caesar.
Mm. Yeah.
The thing I really like, and I would love to have been a fly on the wall when Mark finally got all that activation system figured out. Because if I were him, I'd have been dancing around the room like a lunatic, because it just fits together so beautifully.
Yeah, it's the 3 stages of it as well, isn't it? It's not just one decent mechanic. It's 3 mechanics all in one, which all have an influence on each other. And it's so clever. And it's so simple.
And the whole interlocking bit with the activation where you go, well, I can activate this early on a low number, but it actually activates better if I activate it on a high number. And if I don't use that low number for that unit, it's the only unit that can activate on that low number. Yeah. Can I afford not to activate it?
It really concentrates your mind on what's
really
important.
Does.
Yeah. And the fact that these phases go, each turn is made up of several phases.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. And
love it.
Yeah. And the fantasy version, just subtle tweaks into it as well. It's just it's nothing overpowering in there. It just works.
Mm-hmm. There's very little else to say about it, to be honest.
Yeah. I'm very interested in the action and adventure game he's coming out with. That looks interesting. The skirmish game that you mentioned.
Yeah, so I mean, especially with the period you kind of mentioned, that flagged up is that's very similar to obviously the stuff we've been using with things like pulp action and a few other bits and pieces. So it kind of fits in with that sort of period quite well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see what he does with that.
So there we go. We've finally done it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got there in the end.
Yeah.
guys, thank you for joining me.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Yes.
And thank you to everyone for listening to the show. Hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, take care, happy gaming, and we'll speak to you very soon.
See you at a show.
Or possibly.
Bye.
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 Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you want to know more about Meeples and Miniatures, there are several things you can do. First of all, you can visit the website at www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. If you want to contact the show at all, you can email me at neil@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. You can follow the show on Twitter. Simply look for M&M Podcast or click the follow us on Twitter button from the website. We also have a group on Facebook. That's the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast Fan Club. Again, follow the link from the website. And finally, if you want to help to support the show, you can always donate to the podcast by clicking the PayPal button on the donate page, again found on the website. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed the show. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.